It's Tuesday, isn't it? It's Tuesday in November before Thanksgiving, right? I'm still a little bit under the weather from getting RSV from my grandson, so hopefully my voice holds out. As far as sponsors, the only one I'm going to mention is myself. So yeah, I'm starting a new thing called Your Pod Guy, where I help you make your podcast do what you want it to do. So it's not ready yet, but if you are interested in having somebody consult on your podcast journey, you can give me an email at scott@yourpodguy.com. And when everything's ready, I'll do a full blown thing. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm helping a couple people locally here in Huntsville right now, and I am stoked to get people starting their podcast right. So I'm really stoked about that. But that's all I'm going to say about that. I am really stoked to have my guest here today. So Ryan Singer is a comedian originally from the Dayton, Ohio area. He's released 4 comedy albums and is host of the popular podcast Me and Paranormal You. His comedy special, The Supernatural, was released on YouTube in October of this year, and it was filmed in a haunted school. And I want to bring up the artwork for the Supernatural real quick. This is how I discovered Ryan, and I strongly suggest you check this out. It's on YouTube. Just type in Ryan Singer and it'll come up, and it's one of the best hours I've had in a long time. So I'm going to bring him up right now. It's Ryan Singer. Ryan,
Hey Scott, how are you?
I'm really stoked to talk to you. I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to say that I've watched your special through twice now, and the amount of sincerity that is coming out of you in that special really, I know you see that when you're live sometimes, but it comes through the screen, and I was moved by what you said.
Oh wow, I mean, I don't know if you get a better compliment than that, so thank you.
Yeah, and I'm like probably a direct opposite of you. I'm like a Scully that's atheist instead of Catholic, and I don't know. I just dug in, and at the end where you're telling everybody that you love them and stuff like that, it kind of choked me up a little bit, and
Oh
eh,
wow, that's
yeah,
great.
and so in contrast, I listened to your 2009 album, uh, the How to Get
How
High
my
Without
first album?
Drugs, and it's amazing that you've transformed quite a bit in those years, in about 13 years. There was a little bit of it was funny. Don't get me wrong. I love the album. It was fantastic, but there was some anger there. There was there there was a little bit of an edge to you that I felt like in the recording of that album, you could just pop off and punch somebody at any time. Whereas this one, you seem like you're totally at peace, and the new one, the Supernatural, seems like you're totally at peace with the world and just hit it out of the park.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, it's interesting. I haven't thought about the juxtaposition of the two until you brought it up. And my first album, How to Get High Without Drugs, for sure was, I mean, I think a lot of it was I was pretty amped up. And there was one show. We just did one show. That's the whole. That's just. There's no editing really on that
Mm,
album. It's just in the same way with the Supernatural. I mean, the Supernatural was edited down, but I only performed one
mm,
show, and so in that way they're the same. And every other album I've had in the middle, my second, third, and fourth albums, those were like a weekend of shows that were compiled together for one album to make it sound like one
mm,
show, right? But I love the idea of having the experience of listening to an album or watching a special and being like, this is what it's like to see this person perform on any given night,
mm.
right? Potentially, and hopefully it's a good night,
Yeah.
right? But or you wouldn't release it. But the And I was, I think I had at least I had a couple chips on my shoulder, and on that first album, where I felt like, I really have to prove myself, and because I had gone, I don't know, it took me about 5 years of doing open mic before I could even get like MC
Uh-huh.
work, because I was kind of unbridled and a little bit out of, I'm an artist, don't tell me what to say or do, and I won't censor myself, blah 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 blah, right? And then I was like, and then one day I realized, I was like, maybe if I want to do this for a living, I gotta learn how you do it for a living. What's the craft of stand up,
Uh-huh.
right? As opposed to just going up on stage and spewing. I did have a lot of anger towards God and things like that, from my upbringing, and things that did filter throughout my act. I think that's part of the anger you might be talking about, whether or
Mhm.
not it's a religious joke or not. There was still this edge to me, and also kind of reacting against maybe all the people who looked like me and sounded like me but thought totally different than me,
Yeah.
where I grew up.
Yeah. Yeah, that really makes
And
sense.
yeah.
It's just I always I always love it when you've documented a comedian has documented, their years in comedy with an album. And I'll compare it to like Carlin. So you go through Carlin's albums, and he changed so much from Hippy Dippy Weatherman to the Carlin that we all knew and loved in the 2000s, the 90s and the 2000s, where he's ranting against everything. And it's amazing to see that progression and really growth, because I think that you know after you've been doing it for a certain amount of time, you almost have to get into your real voice, or you would just go nuts on stage. And it just feels to me like you found it. Does it feel like that to you?
Yeah, I definitely feel, I mean, at the very least, I would say I'm much, much closer, to having it. And I think after 20 years in stand-up comedy, it's weird because it was with this special and talking with people about this. I don't know if it's just because of the 20-year mark in my mind, but I think I've finally come to a place where I'm comfortable telling people like, oh yeah, my comedy's good.
Hmm.
And, without feeling like I'm being braggadocious
Yeah.
or conceited or arrogant. And it's 20 years of really hard work that have gone into, being the performer that I am now. And I still have moments of, insecurity and all that kind of stuff for sure. But I do feel like I am so much more closer to being the person I am in my mind when I think about how do I want to be funny, and how do I translate like my idea of what humor and comedy is to people that I don't know, or to people I do know. And I feel like my stage act is much closer to who I am hanging out with my friends now, and who, at this point after 20 years in comedy, are pretty much all comedians. But the it's like the curse and a blessing, what I mean? It's like you're friends with the funniest people in the world, and then and then sometimes you're not hanging out with your comedian friends, and you're just like, oh, I didn't laugh as much as I usually do on a normal, and it's like, oh, that's right, because professionally these people are doing. But anyway, it's I do feel like i'm getting I'm grooving into that and feeling comfortable being who I am. And that always, changes, depending on, because I do believe in growth, and I do believe that if we're not learning or, slightly evolving, we're, growing stagnant.
Hmm.
And I'm really glad that my comedy is much different than it was from that first album. And, I think my second album is also different, and my third album is different. And then, my fourth album, and then this special, becomes, even more different than everything that before it. So, um, yeah, it's really fun to think about that. But I mean, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about myself and my own evolution about, in regards to stand up. But, it is fun to peer in every once in a while, I
Hmm.
suppose.
Another thing I noticed, so on the first album, there was a pretty clear delineation between jokes. It was, you know, the jokes here. Here's the next one. You set it up well. All the transitions were great. In the special, it felt like, and I say this to, I've said this to other comedians, it felt like, first off, it was the first time you ever said it. And second, it felt like there's no way you could have ever written any of this down because it just felt like a stream of consciousness, and yet it all tied together. You got the callbacks, you got, I mean, you've got everything that should be in a comedy act, but it's disguised as, I don't know, like a TED talk or something like that. And really, that's what really drew me in, because I didn't feel like I was watching a comedy show so much.
Yeah, you're definitely right about the, I guess, segmentation of the set. Being able to clearly define, like if I had a set list, like, and I think what's interesting to me about that is when I was very first doing stand up, those 5 years where I wasn't getting any work, I was I was critiqued by the comedy club owner, Lisa Grigsby, here in Dayton, Ohio, who's largely responsible for helping me, get a grip on things and, become a comedian. She told me she said she wanted to see me do the same set 10 times in a row at like guest spots and open mic nights before she would give me an MC week. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll do that. And so I think it was the fourth or fifth time I had done that set. I walk into the back of the room after I get off stage and I'm like, okay, there's 4 or 5. And she goes, are you sure about that? Because it looks like you're saying that for the very first time.
Uh,
Looks like you do. And I
yeah.
was like, and I pull out my set list and I was like, look, this is the set list. That's everything I said. And she goes, okay, we'll be here Friday night. You're hosting or whatever, right?
Uh-huh.
And it was when she realized, like, okay, he did show some discipline. He is committed to actually developing some craft.
Mhm.
And but those first 5 years, I was kind of a maniac, and that I didn't you couldn't really tell, like, the beginning and end of a joke or anything. I mean, I didn't have the tools, the toolbox yet for writing jokes until I really made myself buckle down and work on the craft. But
Mhm.
um, my style now mirrors when I first started in that way, if that makes sense. I was I had the style, but not the voice of who I really wanted to be when I first started.
Mhm.
If and I didn't have the skill and the ability to pull it off at all. And so all those years in between have been the development of writing jokes, learning how to figure out the timing, figuring out what works within me and what people perceive when they see me. What kind of comedy can I do? And I don't like to put rules on anything because I truly don't think there are any rules in stand up, and that's one of the beautiful things.
Mhm.
Now, the audiences and the world will let you know if they think you are breaking rules, I suppose, and or doing things in a way that they're not really interested in. And,
Mhm.
we could kind of consider those to be loose rules, I suppose, if we wanted to. But when it comes to the art form of stand-up comedy, I really don't believe that there are any rules. And you can look at the disparate styles between so many different performers nowadays, and you can realize, oh yeah, this is because of that freedom of art and lack of rules. Comedy is comedy at the end of the day. Is it funny? And if it's funny, then it's comedy.
Mhm. I read one write up about you that I thought was accurate, that your comedy plays to the back of the room, but it resonates with the audience as well. Do you I know I get a kick out of making other comics laugh because it's hard. Even if they think it's funny, they're like, yeah, that was good. If you can actually make them laugh, it is really, it's almost like winning a gold medal or something like that. Eh, how does that feel for you? Are you kind of trying to get your peers to come along, because I mean you are unique.
I think that's um, it would be a lie if I said I didn't.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I've always really enjoyed the back of the room cackling, and not when I'm bombing. Which is the
Yeah.
difference. Like
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
if you can make the back of the room laugh because of the joke and not because of the lack of response from the audience, I mean, that is really a thrill for a comedian. And because I think for me, I often for years, and I still do probably, had a definition of success that I kind of came up with that I like to think about. Like, success is when your heroes become your peers, become your friends,
Mm-hmm.
right? And comedians become friends with each other when they think each other are funny, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, there's also other reasons, but mostly that's the number one thing that makes comics be buds, is that they think each other are funny. And I do love that. But at the end of the day, the job, quote unquote job, that we're doing is to make the audience laugh. And
Uh-huh.
there have been times in my career where I've lost sight of that, and I've struggled because of it. And there's making your friends laugh in the back of the room will not pay your rent
Right.
usually. And so there is something about making strangers laugh, and whether it's about something that they might not have thought about before, or something that they even disagree with to a certain degree.
Uh-huh.
um, there's something about bringing joy into someone's life through laughter that for me is at the heart of the whole thing.
Right.
And making your friends laugh in the back of the room is just kind of like, it's really that icing on the cake.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. That's a very good way of framing it. So I'm gonna go back to the special because it was there were so many words said, and there were so many act outs, and you know compressed into that hour. So how do you approach that? I mean, do you have you written this stuff down, like you want to say it, or have you just done it enough times that you get it to where you think that this is the way I want to present this particular idea, this particular joke? Or I mean, how do you get ready? How do you write?
Y- for some of these jokes, I don't remember. um, and I don't know if that makes sense or not, but here's how I have been writing ever since the beginning. I have legal pads and I freestyle. And I hope by going back through those legal pads later, which I don't usually allow myself to go back and look through a legal pad until I've finished it. It's shameful for me to say right now. I've been so preoccupied with like other projects and things like that. I don't even know how many legal pads I've got that I still haven't had a chance to go through, but there's more than a few.
Uh,
And I'll go back through those legal pads and I'll try to find the funny stuff. And then I will write down in a different notebook, like a composition notebook, a sentence or two that has that idea. Or every once in a while I get lucky, and I've got a fully formed joke when I'm writing it. That doesn't happen all that often. But and then I take it to the stage, and usually I have the beginning, middle, and end of it figured out.
mhm.
And then the energy of the audience and performing it live will dictate how that kind of comes into being, right? And sometimes there are jokes that have just sprung to life unexpectedly in the moment. Like, I have a joke called "The Top 6 Number One Inventions of All Time," and it's on my third album, I think. And it's like a 10-minute. It's like a closing. It's what I was closing with for a couple years, and it's a joke I really love. And that bit came into existence at a not the best, but not the worst LA restaurant comedy show. in the world, right? That used to exist back in the day, because there was a fireplace behind me on stage, and then the audience was kind of like, I don't know, blah blah blah. They weren't great, and then I look behind me and I'm like, fire! Look at that fire! That's got to be one of the top 6 number one inventions of all time. And I just thought that was a funny phrase, one of the top 6 number one inventions. And so then I started just riffing, and then I had to come up with 5 other inventions in the moment, right?
Uh-huh.
And then over time, that bit became what it was. And there wasn't any writing necessarily. I mean, maybe after the fact, I would write down, oh, this would be a good invention. And I'd write something down in a notebook and try to insert that into the bit. So it's mostly freestyle writing. I'll take the heart of something I think was a funny idea, and I'll take that to the stage, and I'll either put it in the middle of like a headlining set, or work it out on an open mic night.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually how, and then I just start the work from there, and then I just keep refining it. And if it doesn't work, and if I really believe in it, I tweak it and throw it out there again. And after I don't know how many times a joke has to fail before I'm just like, okay, this joke is not for me. Maybe
Mm.
somebody else can do this one.
How do you decide? So, in comedy, we all talk about ABC jokes. How do you decide that this? You've got jokes that do okay, and then you've got the ones that kill. How do you decide to put it together in a 60-minute set? How do you decide what joke lives and what joke dies? Even if it's good, it may be an A joke, but it doesn't fit in the set. How do you put all that together?
I think that's depending on. I mean, are we talking? I mean, we could. I mean, there's a couple different ways we could look at it. Like, are we talking about like putting something down on a recording, or actually just doing a live show? Because I think the rules change a little bit.
Yeah, I
Um,
think I think put it in a recording
Putting it
because
in a recording.
I mean there has to be some cohesion in order for that to come across.
Yeah, without getting too heady about it, I try to ask myself, what's the story I want to tell? And where do I want to take these people? What journey do I want to be the tour guide for on this album?
Mm,
Right. Because one of my favorite things about Steve Martin albums, and also George Carlin albums, and Richard Pryor albums, and, Maria Bamford albums, is I'll put on an album and I'll be like, I'm listening to a comedy album. And then within about 5 minutes of the right album, of the right comedian for me, I totally forget that I'm listening to a comedy album. Now I'm having an experience, right?
mm,
And and then it's not until the end of the album that I realize, oh my God, I just listened to a whole album. Like, oh wow, I was transported into a world that was built by the performer.
mm,
And I love that. So for me, going into any recording is that's probably paramount for me. That's probably number one. I want to be a world builder.
mm.
And then it becomes, well, I can build whatever world I want. What is the world I really want to build? And then the pieces kind of fall into place from there.
Excellent. So I think I think you agree that you're unusual as far as a comedian goes. Say you're headlining Fort Wayne, Indiana. What types of responses do you get in different areas of the country?
When I was younger, it was a lot more varied.
Mm,
There were, there was an, I'd like to think it was an interesting period in my career there about 10 years ago where I was headlining some rooms and I was still featuring some rooms. I was featuring like the Looney Bins.
mm,
And, I'd feature for comedians like, you know, Mudflap, Steve McGrew, or Cowboy Bill Martin,
yeah.
people who had very like blue collar audiences compared to what I maybe my point of view as like what people would now consider to be pretty snowflakey liberal, or I guess whatever, which I don't really consider myself anything other than just myself. But because there was a period in time where I was only wearing women's jeans because they were so comfortable. And I remember I would open my sets at all the loony bins on purpose, talking about my Gloria Vanderbilt jeans
Uh-huh.
and how comfortable they were because they were stretchy.
Yeah.
And it was like in this weird period of my career where I had figured out how to let people who are different than me know that it's okay to laugh what I'm talking about, because I'm not here to like call you an idiot. I'm not here to make you feel stupid. I'm just here to share my point of view, right?
Uh-huh.
And I also had the kind of energy about me to where, my hecklers slowly but surely started falling off to the side. Like maybe it's because I was high energy. And I learned a very valuable lesson from Robert Hawkins, who's one of the most brilliant guys when it comes to this. Such a funny guy. But it's like when you have a drunk Late Show Friday crowd, you open your mouth and you don't stop talking until they've stopped talking.
Mm-hmm.
You take the mic, you control it. You are a wall of sound, Beach Boys style. The audience has no choice but to succumb to you and your comedy and sit back and listen now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can take a breath. But I mean, sometimes people are just so drunk that doesn't even matter. But that's neither here nor there. But like it was, um, starting out, I became very comfortable performing to silence in
Mm-hmm.
Dayton, Ohio. That's for sure, which was a valuable thing lesson to learn, I think, especially for, some of the comedy I wanted to do. Because, I mean, I do break some of the rules of comedy, I suppose, in that I have certain bits. Like there's a bit about Gargamel in his origin story that I have on like a couple albums ago, and it's a long bit.
Uh-huh. I listened to
And
that one. That's really good.
oh, thanks. And and it's not, and I allowed myself to not like have to have punchlines like every 10, 15 seconds in this really long story, right?
Right.
And the payoff of that story isn't so much a gut buster as much as it is kind of a thoughtful conclusion, and what I like to think is a satisfying conclusion to that story as well. But
Uh-huh.
um, and so like working on that bit in the middle of nowhere for people who have no idea who I am, it really kind of refined my skills in trying to make sure I capture an audience's attention somehow
Mm-hmm.
and then hold it
Yeah.
and then win credibility or, favor at the beginning to be able to get away with, quote unquote murder in the middle and at the end.
Uh-huh. That Gargamel one, especially, I like how you take a two-dimensional villain and turn them into a human. And the fact that he's kind of going back and forth on what he should do, and then at the end, well, maybe I went too far.
Yeah,
And
yeah. He actually
I,
he there was growth. There was like growth
yeah,
in Gargamel.
yeah, and I thought that was great, and I feel like I the only person I can really compare you to would be Stuart Huff. I don't know if you've ever
Oh
worked with
yeah,
him,
I love Stewart.
but the fact he's like you, there's a sincerity there that you, even though your point of view is coming across clearly, even if they don't have your point of view, you're making fun of it a little bit, your own point of view, and you're softening it to a point where they can stay on board and keep leaning in. And that's really artful to be able to do that.
Well, I think the most important thing about what we believe in is to maintain a sense of humor about it. And you can see when that breaks down around the world around us.
Mm,
Because, when you don't have a sense of humor about the thing you believe in, now you're just a jerk
mm,
telling people what they should believe.
right.
And so that, and and that's not to say I haven't lost my sense of humor at times and gotten angry or upset about things socially or politically, et cetera, because I do. I get very charged up about things. But one of the rules I try to live by as well is, especially when it comes to my jokes, is the more serious the joke is, the more ridiculous it has to be.
Hmm.
So the more serious the topic, the more insane you know where this joke goes,
Yeah.
to like balance the scale of it, right? And I think if I can do that successfully, I can get anybody to listen to it regardless of what they believe and which side of the joke they're on.
Yeah. I I I agree. I mean, it seems like the I I can see people, really cutthroat right wing people maybe getting a little bit ticked off, but man, you just you don't come at them like you're wrong, I'm right. You're coming at them like, yeah, this is what I went through in my life, and I it really comes through.
Well, I'm glad to hear that because I mean, I think comedy builds bridges, and it's at the end of the day, yeah, there's it's we're making jokes and people are laughing, and but to be able to build bridges somehow, we hear about how divisive the world is, and I'm not here to say that it's not. But what I am here to remind people, and I love doing this when I'm performing all around the country, is it doesn't matter where you are in the country. And as comedians, we know this. There's certain fundamental things that everybody, regardless of who they are, what they look like, what they believe in, are going to find funny and they're going to
Hmm.
laugh.
Yeah.
And comedy clubs are really great places usually where people come together, and people of all different walks of life come together and they realize, like, oh yeah, we're all very much the same.
Hmm.
Not in a like generic way,
Hmm.
but in a very like in a uniting way, which is exciting and which is fun as a comedian to be able to help people realize that even when you're not even you don't have to say it to them, they can just subconsciously they can just understand that.
Hmm.
And to me that's a beautiful thing. And there's this scientist, Kevin Kelly, who did a great TED talk on like the evolution of technology and how technology evolves like everything else in the world does. Human beings, technology, anything evolves towards specialization, and we can see that in comedy. Like, it used to be stand-up comedy, then there was political comedy, then there was blue comedy, there's blue collar comedy, there's all the alt comedy. It's like all these specialized versions.
Hmm.
And but what we need to keep in mind is, I think that at the end of the day, it's all comedy regardless of the adjective in front of it, and the goal is to make people laugh. And I think sometimes when we get in trouble as comedians, it's because we put comedy second, and we're here to offend, but it's also maybe a little bit funny.
Hmm.
Or we're here to be political, but it's also maybe kind of humorous.
Hmm.
And I think when the comedy part comes second and the adjective edgy, political, blue, whatever else comes first in the actual practice of performance, that's when we start to get into you know failure territory,
Hmm.
potentially, where it's not like, why isn't this working like it should, like I think it should be.
So, in watching you, I don't see you really emulating any comedian that I know. So, what comedians helped you find your style,
When
either
I
by
was
watching them or
Yeah,
working with them?
yeah, I think the palette is so wide and varied. I loved when I was a kid. I was like, I'm gonna grow up and be a comedian, and I'm gonna be a combination of Richard Lewis and Robin Williams. That's
Hmm.
like, I want to be a neurotic improvisational maniac,
Yeah.
right? I want to be like climbing up a pillar in a theater and wondering, and then talking about like, my mother will not approve of this. My mother says I shouldn't be climbing things. But so I loved those two. I also loved, Steve Martin, Carlin. I mean, I loved the sass and like the attitude of Joan Rivers. I loved the remarkable range of character of John Leguizamo.
Mm-hmm.
And Leguizamo probably falls more into like one person show territory for most people. But John Leguizamo was a huge influence on me, I think, comedically. Adam Sandler, his albums had a huge impact on just like really reinforcing in me like non sequitur silliness. I
Mm-hmm.
think to a certain degree of characters and things. Like sometimes the things that come out of nowhere are the funniest and they're just ridiculous and don't keep it simple stupid sometimes to a certain degree, but that's not to say that everything that what he does is simple.
Mm-hmm.
He was a huge impact on me. And then coming up, the crew that I came up with also influenced me a lot. Like I came up with, for the most part, like guys like Jeff Tate and Dave Waite, who, Dave Waite's much more of a like, like boom, I got jokes, baby. Boom, boom,
Mm-hmm.
boom, 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 boom. And Tate is just so good at like, being in the moment and like no matter what happens, if somebody in the audience thinks they're gonna do something to Jeff Tate's set, they've got another thing coming because he will utterly destroy them. And but just because but without being like a jerk about it. And but also really good at storytelling. One of my favorite comedians who I don't get to see very often is Sean Patton.
Oh yeah.
Sean Patton to me is, oh man, I mean, like I would love nothing more than being able to see Sean Patton all the time.
Yeah.
We're buddies. We're not like thick as thieves or anything, but Sean Patton, he's an inspiring guy. Watching him
Mm-hmm.
do stand up, and I mean, because he literally is unbridled comedy that is like concentrated into a vial.
Uh-huh.
And it's just drip drip funny. I mean, concentrate comedy. And
Uh-huh.
I've had other great influences. Like I got to be on the road opening for Marc Maron for about 4 years, for the better
Mm-hmm.
part of 3 or 4 years, and watching him just control a theater was mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm.
And I do like to think you can learn something from anyone that goes on stage, even if it's their very first time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to keep that in mind whenever I'm at a show. But there's so many that like when it comes to like I do feel like I have kind of come into my own thing, especially the last 4 or 5 years, um and I'm glad to say that I still love all of these other comedians and who I admire and truly want to be like in the way of how funny they are.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as I can do it as Ryan Singer.
Yeah. I get that. How do you feel the comedy has changed, either good or bad, in the 20 years that you've done it?
Oh, well, I make purposeful decisions in my life. At least usually I try to always stay on the brighter side of things and stay away from the negative.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I won't get into like the negative parts of where comedy goes. Maybe I kind of touched on it earlier a little bit, kind of alluded to it. When we put comedy second behind something else,
Mm-hmm.
that's when I'm just kind of, it's a little exhausting
Yeah.
for me. And it's like, are you coming out on the stage to try to shock people, or are we actually going to try to do laughs here?
Mm-hmm.
Um, some people love that, and that's fine, I suppose. But it's just not my cup of tea. So I don't seek that out and watch it or listen to it. But The best part about comedy, I think, especially in the last 10 years, is the explosion of stand up that for me is directly related to the inclusion of diverse voices in stand up, which has been helped along a lot by podcasts and, other things. I suppose social media nowadays. But there's no there's no coincidence that stand-up comedy has never been popular or more popular than it has been when the most amount of diverse voices are getting the opportunity to have platforms to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is just, it's like dummy math. It's like
Mm-hmm.
1+1=2. This is very obvious. So to me, that is the most beautiful thing about stand-up in the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Is this journey that it has been on and becoming more well-rounded, more diverse, and just bigger, better. And I think without that, it would have gone the way of, sword swallowing.
Yeah.
You might be able to find it if you're really looking for it, like a Ren fair or something. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
You got to cosplay it.
Yeah, yeah.
Y- and I really appreciate the fact, because I really see comedians, and I understand what you're getting at. There are some comedians that feel like it's them against the audience, and there's some comedians that feel like they're there for the audience, and you're in the latter. And I I really salute you for having an act and an attitude in your act that makes people feel more positive walking out than when they came in.
Yeah, that's an important part. I think, I mean, that's not to say when I was younger, I didn't. I mean, like you even talked about, my first album still had the remnants of it. There were times where like my whole act was just up there, me just like yelling, and
Uh-huh.
it wasn't fulfilling me. And then it was around 2008, 2009 when I started to realize, oh, I'm funnier when I'm happy.
Uh-huh.
And because I had bought into hook, line, and sinker, you can't be funny unless you're this dark, depressed, tortured comedian soul, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything has to be kind of going to hell in your life, and that's when you're the funniest.
Uh-huh.
And I bought into all those stereotypes,
Uh-huh.
going into comedy. So it's very hard to shake free of those.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And but once I started to realize, oh, I am funnier when I'm happy. And actually, because there's that old line, like, nobody wants to hear a comedian go up on stage and talk about how great his life is or how great their life is. And I was like, well, let's see about that.
Uh-huh.
So when hearing that, I wasn't like, yeah, that's true, like I was in the past when I was very young, but I was more like, okay, this is a challenge. You're challenging me.
Yeah.
You don't think that can be done? Well, let's, if nothing else, my whole life is all about being fascinated by showing that the impossible is in fact possible.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so that kind of became the undercurrent for me. Like, okay, well, let's show people that it can be just as funny, and it can like leave you feeling good, um, to go this way with it. And that's
Uh-huh.
not to say I don't have dark moments in my set. I mean, and that I don't like to play around with those other areas of comedy because my life isn't all roses and butterflies.
Mm-hmm.
I do like to play around with that stuff sometimes, and yeah. So I mean, there's no rule that I live by. I was like, okay, well, every joke I have has to, you know, can't have any darkness to it or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, I want the sense of the experience to be that for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it really comes through. What's the best piece of advice that you've got in your career that you still hold to?
Well, this one's really simple, and I've been really lucky in my career where I've gotten to work with and become friends with and know so many amazing performers. And along the way, I have received so much brilliant advice, and most of it I've probably already forgotten. But I this one is just very simple for like for young comedians, because I used to do this all the time, and I still see it all the time everywhere. But you usually see it when it's a younger comedian. Is don't ask permission to tell your jokes from the audience. And I was hosting at like a Funny Bone or something, and the headliner had me in the green room after the show, and just point blank asked me, why do you ask the audience for permission to tell all your jokes? And I was like, I thought he was making a joke. I was like, what? Okay, that's funny. He goes, no, you're asking for permission. Every time you have a joke about any subject or topic, you'll always ask the audience if they are familiar with that thing first. Like, who? Round of applause. Anybody here drive a car? Round of applause happens. So I'm driving my car the other day. Blah 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 blah. You
Yeah.
can relate to my car because you have a car. It's just like, no, just tell them the joke about your car.
Uh-huh.
You don't need them to know what you're talking about. And if it's something that's so obscure that they don't know what you're talking about, do like maybe a real quick explanation. You don't have to ask them, does anybody here know about this thing? And then if nobody claps, be like, okay, well, let me tell you about this. It's just like, okay, just give a little tidbit of information about that thing, and then boom, go into the joke. It
Mhm.
just I realize it makes the sets flow so much smoother for me.
Mhm.
And for me, it was a way to release the idea of like, the audience needs to know what I'm talking about, or how are they going to laugh? It's like, no, make them laugh, make them understand what you're talking about.
Uh,
And it's like a leveling up kind of thing. And there is a security blanket in asking questions like that.
yeah.
And I get it, I understand. And it took me a minute to really break that habit, because it'd become a habit where I was doing it so much.
Mhm.
But once I did that, I really started to step into the confidence about who I am. These are my jokes. I'm going to tell my jokes, and I'm going to help them understand, even if it's difficult stuff that they might not know about. We're going to make them understand it.
Mhm. Mhm. That's really good advice because I've been definitely guilty of that myself, and not so much anymore. But that's definitely excellent advice. Um, this is kind of a off note, but I was inspired, so I ordered your Ryan Singer's comedy notebook off of Amazon today. What
Oh, this is the 5-year anniversary of the release today.
is it really?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll get a special one then. What's in that?
Well, remember earlier when we were discussing like set lists and
Yeah.
like how do you write a set list? Gosh, I think it was 2013 was the first time I started doing this. Instead of writing a set list out, I would I would still do a set list, but it would be an abstract set list. And so the notebook is the replica that will be delivered to you is all of those types of set lists that I did over the years, that I was doing over the years, in my notebook before shows.
Mhm.
And whether it would have like an idea or a feeling or something I wanted to keep in mind during my performance that night, something I wanted to focus on. Like some of them are just about like, be in the moment, like don't get
Mhm.
caught up, like be really in the moment of this performance tonight, of this show. That's your set list.
Mhm.
And and I would still write down maybe a traditional set list or something on a piece of paper or in a other little tiny notebook or something, maybe just so I could be like, okay, I want to do these jokes in this order, and maybe I'll move this chunk to a different part, try to
Mhm.
work in some new stuff. But overall, this was the theme, and this was the thing I really wanted to focus on that particular night. And
Mhm.
so that's what that notebook is that you ordered. It's a replica of all of those drawings and things like that.
That's great. I think that'll be a good learning tool.
Yeah, it's just a fun little coffee table book too, I think, for comedy fans.
Yeah.
And because most of them are like, visual puns or word plays and things
Uh-huh.
like that, and then my close and then so it's like a drawing or it's something, and then there's always a closer. I write out like something is the closer, and the closer is usually a joke,
Yeah.
you know. But so yeah, it's a fun thing to do before shows,
Yeah.
to, you know, because I think it's Roy Halladay, the late great baseball pitcher. He was an amazing Hall of Famer. He was an incredible guy. He died tragically in a plane crash, but he would his uh, before pitching, he would do that thing where you have like a bunch of different numbers on a board, like whether the little cardboard pieces or index cards, and they would be all out of order. And he would have to, before each start, he would take all of those and he'd reorganize them in numerical order.
Ah.
And it was just like a way to get your brain freed up from maybe what you like, maybe like worrying about, like, oh, there's a drunk person out there, I just can't stop listening to them.
Yeah.
Oh, they're pissing me off already, and I'm not even on stage yet.
Uh-huh.
It's just a way to kind of like get your brain into the creative mode,
Yeah.
while you're also in work mode.
Yeah.
And for me, it was great because some of them are just intricate drawings that just kind of releases that part of your brain to go to places that it might not have gone.
That's that's great. It's kind of like a almost a forced meditation,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
yeah, it gets you out of your head a little bit.
That's exactly what it is. Yep.
Yeah.
You nailed it.
Okay, we are at the point of the show. It's still relatively new, where we each bring a joke to the table. It's called "Is This Anything?" And since you're the guest, I'm gonna let you decide if you want to do yours first or do mine first.
I'll do mine first.
Okay.
Because I just really don't know if it is anything at all. Now this one is, now, you know what? I'm gonna do the one that I just came up with last night because it's really, really fresh. Um, so we're at this, and this will have to be refined and boiled down into some kind of concise idea at some point. Like, but this is the distilling process of these ideas,
Uh-huh.
that have become my act in the last handful of years. So I'm reading this book, and we're at the launch point. Our civilization on Earth is at a launch point of technology where we have reached an acceleration period. We're like in this in between being like these, dumb apes and being these magical wizards. We're right in the middle right now. Is what scientists would classify this period of human history that
Mhm.
we are lucky enough to be living in. But being a part of that, it makes sense to me when you like look around and you see all of, maybe this is probably how the joke should start, by saying this part of it, being like, when you walk around today and you're surrounded by all kinds of people who are just like, what the hell is happening, what is going on, there's this pervasive sense of what the hell is happening everywhere, right?
Uh-huh.
And and it's like there's all these different reasons why that could be happening, but it makes total sense when you understand that we're in a critical part of human evolution, as a civilization, where we're in the launch point where everything gets accelerated super fast. We're the bridge between the ape and the magical wizard who can time travel, and so it makes sense that a lot of us are like, but why doesn't Zoom work? Like like there's something there, I think, that is like this mass confusion slash turns into anger, turns into frustration, right? As
Uh-huh.
a civilization that, like, because it's this growing pain. We're all like, we have the growing pain right now, like, of our consciousness and just everything wrapped into one thing right now. And not to mention the underlying doom and gloom of climate change, that
Uh-huh.
the world is, as a sustainable way for humans to live, is dying right in front of us. And I think that subconsciously impacts everything. When people are like, that's my parking spot, what they really should be saying is, the ice caps are melting and we're not doing anything about it. You know what I mean? Like, that's what really should be yelled in the parking lots of grocery stores or big box stores on Black Friday.
Uh-huh.
But So that's like where this is the idea
Uh,
that just came to me last night because of something I read where they're talking about this launch point or
yeah,
this launch pad period we're in right now. But so I think there's something there. It's just a
yeah, there
question of
is.
really distilling it, though.
Yeah, and I agree that opening it with how we are feeling as a human race, and then getting into the book that's talking about it, I think that's a good idea. And the only tag I could give is, the world is moving on, and we're just not ready for it. And
Yeah.
maybe put that in there. It's because I've got a bit where I talk about the world moving on, and how the older you get, the more at peace you are with dying, because the world has gotten away from you. It's moved on, and you don't really fit there anymore. And yet now younger people are feeling that, younger and younger, because it's going so fast. And yeah, I I think you do definitely have something there.
Yeah, I like that idea. The world is moving on. We're not ready for it. And like I had no idea how into like representation certain people were when it came to the people in commercials. Like too, I
Yeah.
feel like that's part. It's like that's like a. It's like my mom will say something like, "Well, I didn't notice on these commercials." And I was like, "Oh, I never knew you were that invested in who was being represented in the pieces of media that are selling you things you don't need." Like, since when do you care about representation in commercials? But like, uh, but yeah, it's this whole the world is moving on,
Yeah.
and and we're all not ready for it. And I think specifically in our own ways, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, yeah, I definitely think you have something there. So mine is, just to set it up. I started doing stand up when I was 52, and I'm 58 now, and it's been pretty much a hobby for me. But I decided, when I started, I really wanted to be like the everyman type of comic. I wanted to keep it clean, and never swear, always keep things pretty much PG, and that's not me. So I'm a darker, more angry person. So I'm completely redoing everything, because I figure if I'm doing it for me as much as I'm doing it for the audience, I might as well do what I want to say. So I've I've thrown out so much stuff and changed it up, but this is a joke that I did before that I've made a lot darker. So I want you to tell me, first of all, do I have anything? And second off, is it too dark? So, and I recorded it because I didn't know if I was going to have a voice. So here it goes. My day started out pretty rough. Most people would say my experience was great, but I'm not most people. I went to McDonald's to get a large Diet Coke, and when I got to the pay window, the cashier told me that the nice lady in front of me paid for my order. It's great, right? For normal people, but I'm not normal. You see, I'm at odds with the universe. I feel it's constantly looking at me and saying, well, we've given him 58 years and he volunteered at one food drive. We really expected more. My demerits far outweigh my gold stars in the balance of my universal existence. So, not being able to pay for my Diet Coke is just another demerit in my stupid mind. Of course, my first reaction is anger. I'm staring lasers at the lady in front of me. Good for you, Janet, for spending $1 to make you feel like you're the universe's favorite lady, while further proving I was a mistake in your Volvo with a coexist bumper sticker. Those coexist bumper stickers really aren't working, by the way. We're not coexisting very well at all. I think a recall or redesign is in order for those. Okay, back to Janet. I can see her virtue signaling on Facebook about how good it feels to pay it forward, but my anger turns into panic. What if this is my last demerit and the universe decides to eliminate me? I have to pay it backward right now. So I go through the line and order another Diet Coke. I mean, it's basically buy one, get one free at this point, right? Then I tell the nice cashier that I'd like to pay for the person behind me so that I can have the tiniest bit of peace of mind. $35. $35 is what it cost me to get out of that McDonald's parking lot and keep my sanity.
I
There you
want to
go.
know what the rebranded coexist would be. I feel like you left me hanging there.
Yeah,
Um,
I feel like I could do a minute on that.
yeah, yeah. I feel like that's its own thing. Like, you give me some examples of, it shouldn't be coexist. It should be, whatever,
Just
whatever,
calm the fuck down.
calm the
It's
fuck
just yeah.
down. Yeah. Or, I like this idea too of, oh, this is, you pay for my meal or you pay for my thing on the day I get the smallest thing I could get. Like,
Uh-huh.
this is the universe being like, we're looking out for you. Like, literally, we're doing, that old saying of, it's the least you could do. Well, yeah, it
Uh,
literally was the least I could do. That was the least the universe could do in that moment, was buy you a fucking Diet Coke. It's buy one get one free. I didn't even get two, so now I got to go back. um and then I do think that there's something here about this line thing, because I've never heard anyone talk about, um, you know, getting screwed doing that. Um, because I've done that before. Like, it happens at Starbucks a lot, I
uh-huh.
think.
Yeah.
And there's been times where I've done it both ways, where someone has paid for my drink and I've been like, oh, that's great. See you later. And I take off. I'm like,
Uh-huh.
this was my day. I get it.
Yeah.
And don't feel obligated to pay for the person, because the person behind you has no idea that you
Uh-huh.
didn't just pay for them, right? Um, but and yeah, I like this idea too of Janet. You know, guess what, Janet? You buying me a Diet Coke does not wipe away all of your demerits. What dark shit have you been getting into to where you think you're going to wipe the slate clean by buying me a Diet Coke? 99 cents any size, Janet. 99 cents any size of your sin, Janet. What was the size of your sin that you're trying to pay for here,
Uh-huh.
right? And then kind of like, because it's really fun to like make fun of an imaginary stranger,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because we
Uh-huh.
can we can make them the worst person in the world,
Right, right.
if we want to.
Yeah.
And everybody in the audience can kind of be like, oh yeah, I can imagine this imaginary person, right?
Yeah.
Who we
Yeah.
all love to hate, you know?
Mhm.
I think it can go there. I mean, you could bring it, keep the focus on yourself like you did, but I think it really gets funny when you start going after Janet.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah, that makes sense.
why are you doing this, Janet?
Yeah.
Yeah. Guess what? You're in a McDonald's drive-through, Janet. You're not a good person. How do I know that? I'm in a McDonald's drive-through and I'm not a good person.
I like it. I like it.
Right? There's no such thing as a good person in a McDonald's drive-through. So
Uh,
let's wipe away that illusion right now.
yeah, yeah. I like that. The only thing I'm worried about, so the coexist thing just really came up today. So that was something that just popped into my head. Okay, she's driving a Volvo. She's got a coexist bumper sticker, and I just started thinking, well, that bumper sticker just didn't do its job. And so I just wonder how far, and you do a pretty good job of it. You'll go off onto a subject and then come back and you can bring it back pretty good. So I guess I could envelope that in the middle there and still bring them back.
Yeah, yeah. For sure. It's a nice little, there was, oh God, what? TP, oh my God, TP Mulrooney. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
I haven't.
Comic out of Chicago. And when I was an open micer, I'll never forget this, at Wiley's Comedy Club. He was hanging out. I think me and another young guy did guest spots during his weekend. And towards the end of the weekend, he was like, listen, you guys are going to be the next, you guys are next in comedy, right? You're the next generation of comedy. Figure out who you want to be. And hopefully that's yourself.
Hmm.
And he also said, you have so many pockets to fill in these jokes, and you're not filling any of these pockets.
Hmm.
Like the coexist part right there, that's what TP, I mean, I don't want to speak for TP, but I think I can here after 20 years. That's a pocket that can be filled
Mm-hmm.
inside this bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now you're building. Now it's not just a joke. Now this is becoming a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And the more pockets that are filled, the meatier the bit gets,
Mm-hmm.
and the juicier the bit gets, and like the better, and the more like, oh, if this one doesn't work, guess what? There's another one coming right after it. So don't worry about it.
Right.
Um,
Right.
that's definitely the coexist is definitely a pocket to be filled in that one.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's like springing to my mind immediately on that, um, like it was for the Janet part.
Yeah.
but the but that's definitely a pocket.
Good, good. I'll keep working that. And it came from a much shorter joke that basically I was mad because I had a sticky handful of change I wanted to get rid of. So it it morphed into something little bit darker. And
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's great. Hey, before we finish, can you tell me a little bit about the podcast?
Oh yeah, the Me and Paranormal You is the name of it. I've been doing it for coming up on 9 years now. 662. I think I just uploaded the 662 late last night this morning at the time of this recording. And so, wow, I mean, that's a ton of, I guess, episodes. It's a paranormal podcast. I interview a lot of comedians over the years, but anything outside the normal is what I consider to be paranormal. So
Hmm.
there's a lot of ghost talk, tarot cards, psychics, Bigfoot, a lot of esoteric stuff, mystery school stuff, Freemasonry, Rosicrucians, alchemy, UFOs, aliens, all kinds of stuff like that. And, I've become this, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm a full on paranormal investigator now. I've been doing paranormal investigations for years now, and researching all these topics for the podcast over the years. It's a real passion of mine, because of I love the paranormal, and I've had paranormal experiences and things like that really cracked me open. But it's such a fun world, and it kind of goes into the believing, right? It's more
Hmm.
fun to believe is the premise of the whole show. And it's been a wild journey, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And I've actually got a paranormal documentary series that I'm releasing. I put the first episode up. It's called The Bridge, because I believe consciousness is the connective tissue between all things in the universe, including paranormal phenomena. So um, and actually, we filmed it at the same school. I started filming it at the same school we did the comedy special.
Yeah.
So I spent 2 nights doing a paranormal investigation, and then on the third night we filmed the comedy special.
Wow.
So that series, the first episode is up now, and the second episode will be up very soon. And I do believe that we used these paranormal techniques that most people use to try to contact UFOs. I wanted to use them inside of a haunted school to show that all this stuff's connected.
Hmm.
And I don't, it's not like it's a spoiler, but I'm pretty confident that the viewer will agree with me when I say we established contact with what I believe to be extraterrestrial intelligence
Oh, wow.
during, among other things, during this investigation. There's some really, really fun stuff that happens.
Cool. I'm definitely going to check that out.
Yeah, it's called The Bridge, ryansingercomedy.com. On the homepage, I've got the special linked embedded, and I also have the first episode embedded. So,
Mm.
um,
I actually
yeah.
watched a little bit of that this morning, so I'll finish
Oh,
that today.
cool,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. So, yeah, there'll probably be about I'm guessing about 5 episodes in the first season, and it'll be an ongoing thing that I just keep making in the future as well.
Mm. Great. Yeah, I just have to say I'm really glad we got to talk. After I watched the special, it's one of those things that you bookmark because I saw it come up and I like to watch everybody's special, no matter who it is, and I bookmarked it and I finally watched it and it was like I really hope he wants to talk to me because
Well, this
I
was fun,
I
Scott. I
think he's
appreciate it.
good.
Well, I appreciate you, and those kind words are not lost on me. So thank you. I mean, I truly believe the special will reach everybody it's supposed to,
Mhm.
And I mean, after all these years in comedy, I guess part of me is like, oh man, I feel like my comedy should have reached more people by now. And you know, I don't do the comparison game. I don't like to do that. That you're falling into a trap when you do
Mhm.
that. And I think one of the most important just ideas to hold on to for me is we get to define what our success is. And, the minute we surrender control of that and we let the entertainment industry or we let other people, even well-intentioned friends who are telling us, you should have this or you should do blah, 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 right? As soon as we surrender what success means for us to other people outside of ourselves, we set ourselves up for bitterness, for failure, for anger, and for sadness. And I mean, I've made it. I mean, I've totally made it. I make a career telling jokes, and I have for years. I mean, I don't have a 401k or a house or a savings account, but guess what? I've been living the dream. I've made it. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most probably important thing I'd want anyone chasing a dream to keep in mind, at least from my perspective, being
Mhm.
46 years old and, being into it now, is you get to define what it means to be successful for yourself.
Mhm.
Don't let anybody else do that. So sit with yourself and really think about it and ask yourself, what do I really want? And why do I want this?
Right.
And if those answers are coming back in someone else's voice, kick them to the curb because those will not serve you.
Mhm.
And then you can truly start to find some joy and what I believe to be sustainable excitement for the craft and the art that you've chosen to pursue.
Mhm. That's very, very wise words. Thank you for that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's been a long time learning them.
Mhm.
And, I've had a lot of great teachers along the way.
Mhm.
So I'm grateful for that. That's for sure.
Great. Thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it, Ryan.
Well, Scott, thank you for having me. I mean, if I did a podcast like this every day, I'd be on top of the world every day. Like, this has been great. This has been great. I look
That's gonna
forward
be
to
a sound
seeing.
bite.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing how this bit turns out.
Yeah. Excellent. I'll probably send it to you after I do it a couple times.
Okay. Yeah, I'd love to hear it. Love to
Yeah.
hear it.
Thanks a
Thanks again
lot.
for having. Yeah.